Hello and welcome to this webinar. I'm just going to wait for a few more minutes, a few more seconds while people join us. We're just waiting for more people to join. The numbers are going up very rapidly, so we'll start very soon. So, hello everyone and welcome to this webinar. I'm Julia Thrift, the Director of Healthier Placemaking at the TCPA, the Town and Country Planning Association, and I'd like to welcome you all here. The webinar is called Empowering Young People for a Greener Future, Involving Young People in the Transformation of Grosvenor Square using the Voice Opportunity Power Toolkit. This webinar is being run by the TCPA in partnership with others. For those of you who don't know us, the TCPA is a charity and we work to achieve homes, places and communities where everyone can thrive. And this means places where children and young people can thrive. And for us, it's really important that young people are included and their views are listened to when places are being developed and changed. But people, including planners and developers, often don't know how they can find out what young people think about places. Voice Opportunity Power is a toolkit that anyone can use to make this happen, and the TCPA is proud to be one of the partners behind it. This is the second webinar about Voice Opportunity Power that we've held this year, and we're recording it so that it can be put on the TCPA website for those who missed today's session. We've got a great lineup of speakers. We've got Nicola Rochfort, who's Head of Community Engagement and Insights at Grosvenor and has been very much involved in Voice Opportunity Power over the last few years. Matt and Fiona, who are specialists in empowering young people to get involved in shaping the places where they live. And Marwa, who is one of the Mayfair Youth Forum, which she'll explain about in a while. Following the presentation, there'll be time for questions and discussion, so please put your questions in the question and answer box and we'll try and take as many as we can at the end. So now I'd like to hand over to Nicola Rochfort, who can introduce herself and introduce Voice Opportunity Power. Welcome, Nicola.
Thanks so much, Julia, and good morning, everyone. Really great to see so many people on the call today, which I think we were reflecting on just now really shows the interest and appetite in this topic, which is really encouraging. So today we're going to be sharing how youth engagement and applying the Voice Opportunity Power Toolkit helped shape our redesign for Grosvenor Square. I'm going to start by explaining a bit about what the toolkit is, what's in it, why we developed it, and then we can come on to get into the details of how we applied it on Grosvenor Square. So Voice Opportunity Power, or VOP, as you may hear us refer to it as today, is a free resource for anyone that wants to involve young people in the making or managing places. It's designed with professionals in mind who might know that they want to involve young people but need a bit of a helping hand in shaping and delivering that youth engagement programme. Next slide, please. As Julia mentioned, it was developed by some core partners, including Grosvenor and the TCPA, alongside Sport England and ZCD Architects. And we're really pleased to say that it now has over 40 supporting partner organisations who all agree with the core principle that young people should be given a meaningful voice in the future of their neighbourhoods. We're always looking for new partners to bring on board, so do follow up with us after if you're interested in joining. Next slide, please. So why did we develop the toolkit? Well, it's because, unfortunately, young people are routinely left out of conversations about the future of the places that they live. And research from Grosvenor showed that 89% of young adults have never been asked their opinion about the future of their neighbourhoods. Unfortunately, images like the one you can see there on the right are far too common in the wider sector still. And this isn't good enough. Not only is involving young people the right thing to do, in fact, their right to participate is actually enshrined under the UN Convention, Rights of the Child, but youth engagement actually creates better places for everyone, as we'll talk about today in the example of Grosvenor Square. Next slide, please. So what's actually in the toolkit? Well, it comprises downloadable session plans with templates and other resources to give you everything you need to deliver a youth engagement programme. And did I mention it's free? We're really passionate about everybody doing this right, and so it's open sourced for everyone to use. It follows a 6-stage process, as you can see here, that are also shaped to complement a REBA design stage, but also which work just as well with other place-related projects, such as giving young people a say in future retail or asset mix, or maybe working with them to shape a local events programme. Next slide, please. In addition to those downloadable session plans, there's also tons of guidance and important elements to be aware of when you're working with young people, including safeguarding or local experts that you should bring on board, such as youth groups or resident associations. There's also a series of case studies, so you can see how it's been used on various projects of different scales across the UK. Now, when we launched the toolkit in 2020, Grosvenor Square was in really early design stage thinking. We'd recently brought a design team on board, Tonkin Lou, and we'd started to identify community priorities with local residents and stakeholders. But it's fair to say that we were struggling to hear from local young people at this stage, and we knew that we needed to make a concerted effort to fix it. Grosvenor Square was really ripe for us to put VOP into practice ourselves. Next slide, please. A little bit about Grosvenor Square. It's London's second largest garden square, located in Mayfair, just south of Oxford Street. And as I mentioned, during 2020, we were having early conversations with local people to think about what the priorities should be for its future. Today, the square has limited biodiversity, very few amenities, but as you'll hear us reflect on, it really presents a huge opportunity to demonstrate how green spaces can work much harder for nature and the well-being of those that use them. And we also knew early on that to rejuvenate this public space into something magical but welcoming, we needed communities of all ages at the heart of the change. Next slide, please. Over several years, we shaped designs with communities with over 7,000 people taking part in the engagement. You'll hear us talk about a core part of that engagement programme to make sure that young people were at the heart of those conversations. And Grosvenor Square will be transformed into an extraordinary garden. There's going to be around 70,000 new plants, over 40 new trees, a new education building, and many, many more. And I'm really thrilled that the actual transformation of the square actually started on site this Monday, with works expected to complete in summer 2026. So that's a bit of background. Next slide, please. Now you're going to hear all about the process that we went through, including from Mayfair Youth Forum alumni, Marwa, and then Matt and Fiona, who led the Meanwhile project. We're going to give a feel for how we applied and adapted the VOP toolkit for Grosvenor Square and our reflections on how what we went through together during 2021. We also didn't just do this alone, and there's plenty of other organisations who we worked with to make this a reality. I wanted to give a really big shout out to 2 to 3 Degrees, who are youth engagement experts and a long-standing partner of ours, who helped put the forum together with around 20 14 to 18-year-olds from Westminster. And they also delivered a skills development course alongside the VOP sessions you can see here to really make sure that the young people were getting as much out of the programme as possible. And of course, there's the design teams at Tonkin Lou and then BDP, who translated the ideas, priorities and feedback from the young adults into the design as it took shape. And that's enough from me for now. I'm going to hand over to Marwa, who's going to tell you about kicking off the Youth Forum.
Many thanks, Nicola. So when I first heard about the Mayfair Youth Forum, I think I was in sixth form, I was in year 12, and I didn't really know much about it. I didn't really know what to expect. I hadn't obviously worked with any developers or anything before, and the most I knew about Grosvenor at the time was that they owned some property. But from that, I think that very first Zoom session that we had, so bearing in mind this was during COVID times, so we weren't allowed to do a lot of in-person meetings, unfortunately. But our very first Zoom session, it was really, really cool because immediately right off the bat, we weren't treated as we weren't just participants who were there to sort of listen and hear what they had to say. They immediately sort of involved us, and it was very, very active conversation. Something really lovely that they did for us is they sent us welcome packages to all of our homes. They had things like notebooks, pens, and a letter, which was really, really lovely. It was quite a small gesture, but that it showed that they were quite serious about involving us, which we really appreciated. We did some really, really enjoyable icebreakers and things. We got to know each other, and it was really lovely because we were obviously all going to school in the same sort of neighbourhood, which was around Westminster. So it was lovely to meet loads of different people within sort of very similar fields to us. So it was really, really lovely. And we didn't just get told sort of what the forum was going to be. We had a very big part in helping to define what it was going to be. You know, we had like an active partnership, and we co-created some goals and set a real tone for collaboration. And that first session, I think, made it really clear to us that this was a space where we were going to actually cause some change to happen. Next slide, please. So quite early on, we agreed on what we wanted the forum to stand for, which we call these terms of references, and we wrote them ourselves. What we aim to do is to represent young people across Westminster and not just our own voices. We wanted to be heard and to see our input actually used, because I think it's quite often that, you know, especially when you're at that age and they're like, oh, you know, we really value your voice, but they don't really do much about it. But I think it was very different right off the bat, because we knew that we were going to be making an impact. And we also wanted to sort of build some skills from this as well. You know, it's things like public speaking, things like leadership, and learning a little bit about the sort of industry itself. And finally, we wanted our time and our ideas to be recognised as quite real contributions. These 5 goals became our foundation, and it guided everything we did and kept both us and all the adults involved accountable. Back to you, Nicola.
Thanks, Marwa. Yeah, great summary of how we launched the forum. Following that launch event, we then went into the official session 1 of VOP, and this was in January 2021, and we were still trying to navigate restrictions at that time. Can't quite believe we were living in that world. The main objective of this session was to start to build a really deep understanding of the members' lived experience in their local area, and particularly how their environment around them was impacting their day-to-day. Because we were online, we used a mix of digital platforms and tools, including Google Jamboard, as well as Commonplace, as you can see on the screen here, to really help tease out those insights in a more engaging way. We used a traffic light RAG system to assess places across Westminster, and in particular in Mayfair, to see places where the members would feel safe and welcomed versus those that they felt maybe weren't for them or they felt unsafe. And this helped us and the young people spot patterns and start to articulate what really mattered to the group and other young people like them. And what emerged wasn't just a list of locations, it was a way of thinking about place through the eyes of young people. On the next slide, you'll see how from that, we then began shaping what would eventually become the manifesto for Mayfair. This wasn't just a summary of the views that we'd heard, it really became a working document that guided each part of the project as we moved forward. The answers are really wide-ranging, from quite practical to more imaginative, things like green space, spaces to study, lighting, signage, somewhere to sit with my friends. And at this stage, it was essentially a brainstorm, so different hopes and frustrations. But rather than tidying it up ourselves and taking it away for the professional team, we actually worked with the group in the session to cluster their ideas to form a shared vision. On the next slide, you will see how 5 clear themes began to emerge, and we worked together to turn those into values and refine them until the group felt really confident and proud to sign them off. And the manifesto for Mayfair was born. I mentioned that this is more than just a summary document. It became a real strategic tool that helped us as a project team to stay accountable to the young adults, and it gave them something to keep us accountable to, a reference point that they could keep checking the proposals against. And this was going to be really important when we started to introduce the early design thinking for Grosvenor Square. It meant for the forum that they could critique and review the designs constructively. They could ask really sharp questions around specific topics and also feel confident that their feedback was grounded in something that they'd been a part of shaping. And what's more, and this was something that feels quite obvious saying now, but was a bit of a kind of a light bulb moment, is we saw some really strong alignment between what the forum were calling for and what we were hearing more broadly from wider community engagement. And that overlap really reinforced that youth engagement isn't something that needs to sit on the side and kind of be in a box on its own. It really belongs at the heart of placemaking conversations. Back to you, Marwa, to talk about session 2 and 3.
So session 2 was quite cool. It was actually our first in-person session that we had with everyone. So it was like really lovely. We got to meet everyone that we'd, previously only met in like the Zoom meetings and stuff. I mean, I was quite lucky. There was quite a few people from my sixth form. So I did know a few people already, but it was really nice to meet the whole group as well. So we met up at Grosvenor's office in Mayfair. And I think that's where it sort of really brought everything to light. I think it's so much easier to discuss things and then like have it as like a sort of thought process. But then when you start to meet up in person and you start discussing all the things you're going to do, it becomes a lot more sort of concrete. So, of course, we've done a lot of thinking about our neighbourhoods and what young people need from public spaces. But when we actually went to visit Grosvenor Square, I think that was like really, really helpful in like sort of visualising everything and seeing what exactly we wanted to do with that space. But before everything, of course, as Nicola was mentioning earlier, we sort of went back to our manifesto, making sure that we kept that in mind and sort of had everyone sort of sign off on it and keep it at like as their priority. And then afterwards, as you can see in this picture, we all went out into Mayfair in groups to explore and evaluate two real places. We had Grosvenor Square and an area nearby called South Morton Street. What we used was like we had scorecards, and we basically rated how well each space matched the values in our manifesto. Things like how welcoming it was, for example, or how accessible it was, or how many sort of activities and things that they had that were maybe attractive to young people. Next slide, please. These review exercises that we then did were super, super hands-on. We were encouraged to think about how the design and the layout of a space affects how we feel in it and whether we'd actually spend some time there. Sorry. And we looked at things like signage, places to sit, greenery, and whether we'd feel safe coming back with friends. When we came back to the innovation space, each group shared what they'd found. A lot of us said that Grosvenor Square today didn't feel like much of a space for young people. It looked nice, I mean, as parks do, but there really wasn't that much to do. There wasn't a lot of seating. And most of us didn't even know that it was there before the project, which is quite surprising considering how close it is to Oxford Street. So we fed all of this back to the architect team at Tonkin Loo, who also joined us for this session. And this feedback really helped to shape the next steps of the process. Can I get the next slide, please? So we ended up covering session 3 on the same day because considering we were all together and we had time to spare. And session 3, where we really focused on talking in detail with the design team from Tonkin Loo, and they gave us a full walkthrough of some of the early designs they had for Grosvenor Square, including things like visuals and models of the space. What was really valuable is that we weren't just there to look. We obviously gave some really active feedback and we were there to respond. We used our manifesto and we were able to evaluate some of the proposals that they'd offered and give detailed feedback on what we thought were some of the pros, but also some of the maybe drawbacks and things that they could improve. And some of the ideas that we liked included things like greener designs and ideas of a space that felt a little bit more alive and inclusive. But we had obviously our own suggestions as well. Things like making seating much more flexible or perhaps having events there and things that might be attractive to all different ages, of course, including young people. The design team listened, took notes, and really, really sort of put like weight in our feedback, which was really good because it felt like we were actually influencing what happened next. And at the end of that session, what we prioritized, we decided what we were going to prioritize was seating and events. We used a visual target and to each prioritize what was most important to us. And these areas are what the Meanwhile project ended up being about, which you'll hear a little bit about later on from Matt and Fiona.
Thanks, Marwa. Next slide, please. So we knew that there was going to be a little bit of a lull between the session that we had in person in April and the next time that we were going to get together with the design team, partly because they needed time to digest what they'd heard from the young people, but also because we were still navigating lockdowns and trying to figure out when we could meet one another. So we knew that it was really important to keep that momentum going, particularly after that really energising day that we'd had in the spring. So to do that, we worked with a smaller cohort of 4 members, including Marwa and Liz, who you can see on the screen there. And these were young members who'd shown a real strong level of commitment. They'd really shown up at each session. They'd really kind of engaged and took part and became real ambassadors for the programme. And they also encouraged other members to stay involved and maybe support the shyer voices to vocalise their views more and become a bit of a mentor for other young people in the group. At the same time as continuing to engage with this core cohort, we also began shaping what would become, I think, two of the most exciting parts of the project, and delivering on those priorities that you've heard Marwa mention. First is around a celebration event, which we were planning between the Youth Forum and a charity called Southwest Fest. And not only was that going to be a chance to really showcase the forum's work to the wider community, but also celebrate everything that young people had achieved during our time together. And secondly, the Meanwhile project, which we partnered with Matt and Fiona to deliver. And you'll hear them talk about that in a second. I mean, as specialists in co-designing with young people, their involvement really was crucial, because it helped shift between ideas into action and turning sketches and priorities and models that the young people were producing into something tangible that we could translate to the design team. I'm going to hand over to Matt and Fiona now, who'll talk about this in more detail.
Thank you, Nicola, and thank you, Marwa. Amazing lead into us. I hope I can do you justice. So as Nicola and Marwa have introduced, we were able to meet with Marwa and the forum members and build on the amazing work that they had been doing with the architect team. And the part of our project was a Meanwhile project, and by that I hope I'm talking to a group of people that are familiar with this, but an opportunity to make a temporary intervention into a place, and in this case, really seeing, as Nicola has said, that as a space for testing the ideas that Marwa and the forum members had been exploring to date, but in a real tangible way. I guess the key objectives of that are stated on this slide. They were to demonstrate that the Mayfair Youth Forum's input could influence the outcomes, which they were already starting to see, but this was a direct opportunity for us to work with them to show that how that could be done, to provide an opportunity to test for potential seating designs. And I think this idea of Meanwhile as a sort of as a prototype, prototyping and exploring and testing ideas, and then reiterating and building from that is a really critical part of that. And ultimately, to have fun and to do that in an engaging way that could express those ideas developed by the young people in this context to the wider community as part of that celebration event. Next slide, please. So this slide is from our first session. We had 3 amazing sessions, direct sessions, workshop sessions with the young people in session 4. So 3 moments over respective weeks. It was a very intense period for them. I know there was lots of thinking. And worth saying that the architects were also part of these conversations, so a really important part of listening in. So the first session, we introduced what we do, and you see some slides here of real live projects. One thing that identifies the way in which we engage with young people, particularly in this Meanwhile space, is by giving them opportunity to make actual places and spaces that other people can use and explore. And that could be temporary, in the case of the one we did at Grosvenor Square, or it could be permanent. And on the right, you see sides of us actually looking and thinking about that seating at 1-to-1 scale. So we took over the centre of Grosvenor's office, and we laid huge sheets of paper and actually thought about these points that Marwa and Nicola have raised, that they talked about different ways of gathering and meeting and thinking about how that seating, that was our brief, to think about seating for the space and for the square in a way that was perhaps afforded more group gathering for different activities. And we're exploring that here by sort of almost figuratively lying on the floor and sketching around people to explore the size of those pieces of furniture. Next slide, please. We then we were always really interested in how we can, if you like, democratize that thought process, and when we're working collaboratively, and when we're working with a group of, say, 20, 30 people in this case, we're thinking about how collective ideas could be brought to the table, but then distilled in something that everyone feels they've got a part of. We never work in a way where there is a competition, or there's a winner, or there's a single selected idea. So what you see here from our second touch point is building on what we'd learned at 1-to-1 scale, thinking about the human body, is a whole series of smaller scale models, people working in pairs in this case, and the drawing ideas out through dialogue is a really critical part of that. And in these sessions, there are also moments of coming together and talking And on the right, you see this output from session 2, which is, I'm going to really bad mental math here, but probably about 20 or so amazing models about different ways in which we would gather. And then we get together and we look and explore those. And I think go to next slide and you'll see the final part of the pre-design work. And through that exercise, we were able, or Marwa and her colleagues were able to identify very different types of gathering and to think about a bench and seating in quite radical and new ways, whether that was smaller scale interventions. You see 3 of those iterations and drawings from the young people in the forum on the left. And actually how that larger scale seating has manifested in the final design. But those three scales on the left, smaller scale gathering, eating for and gathering for sort of social activity, and larger scale meeting opportunities. And really lovely, always thinking, I mean, we're not kept it here, and I know Fiona will talk about it in a little bit, but really thinking about wider points of accessibility, inclusion, and how everyone would be able to use these equally and with equity, and also about the materiality, the ways in which the materials we're going to be building this from. And I'll leave Fiona a little bit to talk about that element of it. I think that's next slide, but back over to Marwa.
I think one really cool thing about the seating was that we really like a lot of thought genuine went into that. Like I remember we did little scenarios and stuff where we acted if we had chairs that were shaped in certain ways, how would it be if you were, for example, strangers, or if you were friends trying to communicate to each other. So a lot of thought genuinely did go into it. So it wasn't just like, oh, you know, different sort of benches or whatever. So I think you could see from some of the sort of designs on like Matt's slides that they were quite strange, but we really did put a lot of thought into it, which I thought was really fun. So going on to session 5, it was a very sort of full circle moment by the time we got to this point. It was our chance to basically see how everything that we had said over the last previous months and everything that we'd planned, all the work that we'd put into, how it actually shaped the project, and to celebrate what we'd achieved basically. So we had a big celebration achievement, and we had this event that took place in Grosvenor Square, right next to the exhibition of all the latest design proposals. There were big display boards, models, and a walkthrough of all the changes the design team had basically made based on some of the community feedback, including our own, of course. And before the event started, we got to review the proposals on our own. We completed surveys and things to give some final feedback and make sure that we understood exactly what had changed. Then once people started to arrive, we were the ones who explained all these different designs and stuff to them, which was really, really cool. I think it was lovely to be able to talk to all the different people there and like present ourselves as people who'd actually worked on the project and not people who were just coming around to see everything that was going on. And what I think another really big part of this event was that everyone had their own roles and things, because we were like the hosts of the event basically. So some of us actually did some of the workshops of Matt and Fiona, and we helped visitors understand the design process and even do some little buildings of mini models and stuff that you can see here. And other people helped with things like social media, which is what I was doing, things like event logistics, and some of the people were just guiding people through different proposals. And next slide, please. We got to really, really celebrate properly as well. With our big event, what happened is that we all received certificates. So if you can see on the right, that's actually me. And we received a certificate. On the left, it's from the West End Ward Councillor, Tim Barnes. And on the right is actually Grosvenor's Chief Executive, James Rayner. So it was a very sort of come around moment where all the hard work and sort of things that we put in was finally like a big thing to celebrate everything that we'd done. So this event was obviously open to the public. We had loads and loads of people come, and throughout the day we spoke to loads of different people and got loads of different perspectives. And with our little certificates and our goodie bags, it really felt like we'd accomplished something, and we were really proud of the work that we'd done, I think. Next slide.
Thanks, Marwa. Another lovely moment of South West Fest was the Mayfair Youth Forum opened up the co-design of the temporary meanwhile seating to the wider community yet again. So the image on the left on your screens shows an activity that the Mayfair Youth Forum ran for the local community, whereby people could collect anything they found within Grosvenor Square or further afield that they wanted to then set within little resin tokens that would be attached to the seating, in a way encompassing the ideas from the wider community becoming part of the meanwhile seating that went into Grosvenor Square. So a really lovely way to crowdsource ideas that bit further, and also for the forum to really take ownership of leading this process and inviting wider members of their community into the process. If we go to the next slide. So the next stage was the fabrication of the seating. So Joe, who you can see on the screen on the left here, he took the young people's ideas for the design and developed that into a series of 3 types of seating, as Mar was previously explained, that could then be fabricated by himself and the team. And then we had a wonderful day in August back with the Mayfair Youth Forum, deciding, positioning where those seating would go throughout the summer, literally physically carrying the seating to different corners of the square to decide where it would work best. Thinking about viewpoints, where different people might access it from, which orientation in terms of the sun. And then the young people physically led that process of completing the seating and fixing it in place. And then thinking back to those beautiful tokens that the wider community had made, to deciding where they should go on each of the seats, and drilling the holes for those and fixing those. And if we jump to the next slide, we will see the seating all in position and being used, and a really lovely celebratory moment of I think, going back to what Nicola said at the outset, really putting ideas into action. We always note this in these kind of projects. The ideas that young people have are second to none, they're exemplary, and it's fantastic when they can actually be made real, and that means both in the long term but also in the kind of shorter term. I suppose we're talking here, Mara, it was probably in total less than two months, maybe maximum 3 months from that first time that we met and you started that design process through to seeing this seating in place in the public realm, where it stayed up for 2 months that summer, and then it went on to find a permanent home in a local forest school. So a really beautiful process and a privilege for us to work with Marwa and the team. I'm going to pass back to Nicola.
Thanks so much, Fiona. I might quickly ask you to mute yourself. Thank you. Brilliant. Yeah, I guess I wanted to make the point that meaningful engagement of any kind isn't one-off, and this also applies to the way that we worked with and continue to engage with the Youth Forum. We've really got some strong relationships with the key members, and 5 years on, which I can't quite believe I'm saying that, many of them moving from school to college or college to uni. We're sharing panel discussions with them and talking about how important inclusive engagement is. And also from a project point of view, many members of the Youth Forum continue to be involved in the redesign. Marwan and some of the other members joined us and the team at the Museum of London Archaeology for a dig in the square earlier this year to uncover some historic artefacts before we started on site. And I think that's the point, to say that this wasn't a kind of one-off standalone element. Those conversations were really important during that design phase as it then moved into planning, but it continues as it goes into delivery, and it will continue as it goes into operation. And that's a really key principle that I think is important to hammer home. Next slide, please. And I hope that you can all agree that through that wide and deep engagement and really ensuring that people of all ages and backgrounds are part of the conversation, we've ended up with a really incredible design as a result. We deliver on the principles that the Youth Forum called for. You can see in this image, there's seating that allows people to face each other, space for people to sit that might have access needs. There's another image on the next slide where we've got dedicated areas for younger children to play amongst a natural haven of wildlife and habitats. And then one more image on the next slide from me. And there's also an education building here to provide opportunities for children and adults to learn about the environment, biodiversity, and the square's rich history, while still retaining some open space there, so we can have some other community events that look a bit different. And yeah, I really do think that the transformed square will show what we can achieve when we invest in public green space, and we wouldn't have got there without the help of those on the call today. I'm going to pass back to Marwa for some concluding remarks.
I think ultimately what we want to highlight is that young voices really do bring a fresh perspective and lived experiences. And I think proper energy to sort of community and environmental issues. When we're sort of genuinely included in the conversation, we don't just participate, we really help to shape meaningful change. And I think involving young people isn't just the right thing to do. It makes the outcome stronger, more creative, and I think a little bit more future focused, because it's so important to remember that all the changes and all the like things that happen right now, it's our future they ultimately affect. I think people who make the decisions, they get to enjoy it, of course, but like ultimately we're the ones who are stuck with the result of what they do. So I think it's so important that like our views and our like outlook is included. And I think the Mayfair Youth Forum is obviously just one example of something that we something that obviously Grosvenor, for example, ran or that I took part in. But it's so important to remember that there are loads of different opportunities that are becoming available now, I think, with companies recognizing the sort of the value and the insight that you can get from youth perspectives. And because of that, I think it's super important that you guys sort of contribute when you can and get involved and sign up for all these things. I think I never expected when I first signed up for it to actually be something I was going to be so involved in, even more like 4 or 5 years later. But I think it's so important because ultimately you guys are going to be the ones to shape the future. Thanks so much for listening, I think.
Great. Thank you all for those fantastic presentations and insights into Grosvenor Square. And it's so exciting that the redesign is on site now, and it's just started a couple of days ago. And I can't wait to go and see it. Nicola, did you say that it'll be finished next summer in 2026?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, something to look forward to. And I loved your description of it being magical and welcoming. So that I really can't wait to go and see it. That's been really interesting. Some people in the audience have already added questions to the Q&A box, but if you have more questions, please continue to add them because we have got time to take them. So I am going to start with one question here, which I think is probably for Nicola. How did you go about recruiting the young people involved in the group? And were there any steps you took to try and engage young people whose voices might be lesser heard, who perhaps don't put themselves forward for opportunities like this?
Yeah, thanks very much, Julia. I think this really talks to the fact of working with those local experts, and we couldn't have done that without 2 to 3 degrees. They already have a fantastic network of young adults within Westminster, and they themselves are constantly working to reach those that might not normally sign up for those sorts of initiatives that they work with other partners to provide. I know that 2 to 3 go out to various youth clubs as well as colleges and schools to make young adults aware of the opportunities that are available to them. That's not to say that that was it and that's where we stopped. I think also when we'd had that first session, the initial forum members then became a real advocate for the programme itself. And as you'd heard Marwa talk about, I think it was hopefully a bit better than they were expecting. And so they were then excited to tell their peers about it and their siblings. And it did grow from that first session about getting more of that appetite and engagement. I might also bring Mara in and to say, what was it that kind of caught your attention about it, and why did you sign up that others on the call might learn from?
I think I did it through, so I did some programs and things with 2 to 3 degrees. And then when they sort of advertised this, it sounded quite interesting. It was local, and I was like, it would be, I'm going to be honest, at first it was like it might be a good thing to add to my personal statement type thing. So it does start out, I think, when you're that age, you are looking for a lot of opportunities and things to sort of sign up to. And I think 2 to 3 degrees were really helpful because they were advertised in my school. And then so after I did a couple of I think they do these programs called Mastering My Future. I remember I did a couple of those. And then through that, they advertised the Mayfair Youth Forum. They said it's this new program that's coming up. You guys should definitely sign up. And through that is what I signed up. But I think schools will often push these sort of things, but if they are local and if they're happening around, I think definitely Grosvenor can obviously contact local schools and stuff as well to make sure that people really do know that these opportunities are happening, of course. But 2 to 3 degrees, they are amazing for this sort of thing. They have so many different programs and stuff. So that is my go-to.
Great, thank you. And Marwa, I wonder if I can put another question to you. Do you think that the process of being involved has given you skills or confidence or benefits that perhaps were unexpected, that weren't just about helping to redesign Grosvenor Square?
I think definitely in like those sort of spaces, I think it can be quite difficult to be like a young person and have your voice actually heard. Like it feels like a little bit like you're just a child, what do you know sometimes? And that is quite a common thing where like in things like this, you're sort of there to listen, maybe hear the experts talk about it. But with this, I think it sort of gave me the confidence to recognize that I do have good ideas too, for example, that we as young people also have good ideas. And just because we lack experience that our peers might have, or like that people a little bit older than us might have, it doesn't negate our views and our values. So I think it was a really big stepping point for me to like recognize that my ideas should be recognized and like know that like I have things to say, things that can help improve things that might have been offered by somebody who might be an expert, but I definitely can have feedback that helps to enhance that. So things like that, a lot of public speaking. I think we spoke to so many strangers, like you had to go up to people when we were doing the surveys. You had to stop random people and be like, would you mind taking a survey for us? Which can be quite daunting if you've never done it before. But I think it made me a lot more comfortable, to speak to strangers and be able to just speak to people about different things. So yeah, those are some of the things I think I definitely picked up, but there's obviously a lot more.
Great, thank you. And I think the fact that you're speaking so eloquently on this webinar is perhaps it shows what's been achieved by this.
Thank you, that's very kind.
I'd like to turn to Matt and Fiona now, because you've got lots of experience of working with young people on projects like this. And I just wondered if you've got any tips for people who are perhaps new to working with young people on projects like this, and would, you know, what sort of things should they be thinking about? Fiona, can I turn to you first?
Yes. Firstly, I want to apologise for the background noise where I am. Do flag to me if you can't clearly hear what I'm saying, and I can pass over to Matt. I think it's a really good question. There are lots of factors. The most important one is one of the responsibilities Matt and I and our team feel is we really try to strongly understand the boundaries of I don't want to say constraints, but where those frameworks lie within which the young people can have freedom in terms of their decision making, and make sure that they're established at the outset to ensure that everybody's expectations are managed and that there's real authenticity there. I think there can sometimes be a worry that opening up ideas to young people, what if their ideas are completely unrealistic? Actually, as long as you share budgetary constraints or examples of what a budget can enable, as long as you explain kind of time frame constraints, or you'll find young people absolutely understand all of that, and in fact are often the ones who will be pushing most strongly for equity of provision, for accessibility, for environmental considerations. So I think really leaning into that and trusting that young people absolutely can be given this responsibility and more, but being open with them, the same way that any good community engagement would be doing that for everybody that it's engaging with.
Thank you.
Matt, I don't know if there's something you want to add.
I only I would say that we work all over the country, and in areas that are new to us, and whether that might be a design team working with or out a specialist consultant like us, I think we place huge value on that local expertise that comes from young people, but also from the partners that we work with, and we always try to work with who have that local expertise and hopefully have that pre-existing or developed relationship with those young people that we're hoping to reach. So in this case, that longevity of that relationship of 2 to 3 degrees with key members of the forum, but also in taking the voice opportunity power process, taking time to build that group and build that confidence in that group. So when it comes to articulating those ideas about place and about their lived experience, that's done in a way where it's equitable and can be done with confidence, as we've all seen today with Marwa's amazing contribution. I mean, it just continues to go from strength to strength in that space. So I think it's really important on not particularly as designers, or if there are any architects or planners in the room that are, or other designers coming from afar to a project, is the assumptions that we all have to make when we don't do that community engagement correctly sometimes misses the mark. So finding that space and also doing it at a timely way. What's really strong about the VOP process is it brings in that conversation of community engagement at the point of shaping the design, really at an early stage, and even starts to influence the brief, if you like. And I think that's a really powerful part of that. So consultation is genuinely consultation in terms of it's a dialogue and an evolution of an iterative kind of process of thinking, and not just this is what's here, what do you think of it, which at the worst side of consultation, that's what it can be. And we're thanks. Stop.
Thank you. And it might be helpful just to go back to the slide that showed the different stages in the VOP process, if that's possible to put that slide up again, because it's very carefully structured, isn't it? So that the right conversations happen at the right time in the process. And I think that's quite an important point to make. So there we are. Thank you very much. And I don't know whether Matt, can you tell us a bit more about the stage of the process that you were brought in at? Is that something that you're able to talk about?
Definitely elaborate a bit more on that. So as Nicola identified, we're one of those sort of organizations that's signed up to the values and ambitions of the VOP process, but we'd also built a relationship with Nicola and the team at Grosvenor and other contributors to the development of that, when we talked about and helped input to the chapter, particularly on meanwhile. So I think this was an opportunity, Nicola, I think one of the first opportunities to really fully test this live, and it was a privilege to be part of that. And I guess that built on other work that we were already doing in this space, the value of meanwhile. And I guess the really important thing about those sessions is those design sessions that lead through to built and made artifacts that we can all use and test, is defining the sort of boundaries beforehand, and that was done both with Nicola and Marwa and the team. So under being really clear about what the brief effectively was for that piece of meanwhile furniture, or the pieces of meanwhile furniture, and where we often describe it, as Fee sort of said, as sort of the red lines or the parameters within which we're working as a team. So they were given huge agency to unpack what it meant to have a bench in a park, and you can see the outcomes both in the things that Marwa and the team designed and made, and actually how with some evolution over time have changed, but still are core to their ambitions. So that's a really important part of that. And then I think as we go through those processes, from exploring lived experience in a direct way in those first sessions, and exploring design thinking and design how you take an idea and make it into something physical, that journey through model making and tools, which we want always to be allow everyone to contribute in their own way. And we find that making is both very collaborative, and it's often a skill set that intuitively everyone feels kind of quite comfortable with. So the action of making and exploring design through collaborative means. So those processes are often the models I talked about were done in pairs and then coming together and talking. So a huge amount of that work that Nicola and 2 to 3 Degrees had done with Marwa before were about building, and I'm sure they were hugely articulate beforehand as well, but was about building that confidence of talking about ideas. That's a really important part of that meanwhile design process, as it is for design professionals to be able to communicate their thinking and for that to evolve. And then I guess hopefully from as we scaled that thinking up and we made those prototypes, an opportunity then for them to see and get involved of actually how things were made, to think about wider kind of considerations of the material kind of culture of the fabric of our places that ties in with the sustainability elements of the project. And then, of course, you know, when you physically see that thing, you get involved in physically making and placing that thing in a site. There's that's an incredibly powerful moment of collaboration, but also of agency. And ultimately, this is what that process is about. It's about demonstrating that agency and also to get feedback. And I think, you know, through that being that meanwhile furniture being able to be there in this case for it was a COVID extended now back to 28 days, but that 56-day period of planning free, being able to test and explore ideas. The idea of meanwhile as a laboratory and as a sort of safe space to test ideas and explore them and experience them is all part of that. And hopefully we're always thinking of, in the meanwhile space, of what happens afterwards, what happens to those pieces, and that legacy is always really critical. Please talk to that. But also in the use of meanwhile more generally, or these processes more generally, after that meanwhile, what happens? It can be a really good way in bigger scale projects to fill gaps, maybe while development is being considered. But it's really important that the activity and functions that are provided through that meanwhile opportunity are then also considered in the long term, as they have been in this case. But you can't offer something to a community that's they've made and then take that away. I think it's really important about thinking about that legacy piece and how those ideas, if tested, are embedded in the final piece.
Thank you very much. I'd now like to turn to Nicola. Obviously, Voice Opportunity Power, the toolkit, is free to download, which is fantastic, but there's still quite big resource implications to actually put it into practice. So that we've had several questions about that. You know, what resource is required? Grosvenor is a very wealthy organisation. Other developers maybe less so. How practical, you know, what resource is required and how transferable is it to other organisations who are undertaking development?
Yeah, thanks, Julia. It's an important question. I'd really recommend looking at the website on the Toolkit Hub. We've got some kind of indicative cost table there with some guidance on the type of cost you would expect to need to factor in for an engagement programme like this, including things like facilitator cost, paying a youth worker, incentives, room hire, etc. So do have a look at that. It's kind of a table for people to fill in once they know the day rates of various people. Grosvenor did fund this alongside investment into wider public engagement. But I think some recommendations I'd have for others who are looking to run a similar programme is to look at where your resource and skill sets lie. In many organisations, there may well be individuals that can confidently facilitate a session with young adults. At Grosvenor, we're pretty self-sufficient in that space now, and we've really worked to kind of upskill other representatives in the organisation to give them that capability. There are also, on occasion, design practices who have individuals that, again, could reasonably get up and talk about design projects to under 18s. At other design practices, that isn't always the case. So see what you've already got to play with in terms of your existing consultant team to be able to reasonably deliver a session like this. I think also identifying opportunities within your engagement program that you've already got around a project for some shared elements where there's going to be some benefits for young people to get stuck into. For example, on Grosvenor Square, we knew that South West Fest were going to be doing an event in the square. They're a charity that already had some funding through the council, and they were already going to be doing something in the square that we then leveraged to give young people a voice in what that shape to be. I also think that what this is really evidencing, to the wider sector is the value of good engagement skills and making sure that that's factored into a project team or to a different organisation. But how long's a piece of string? I mean, we've delivered some youth engagement projects that have cost us a couple of £100. We've also delivered some engagement programs that have been over 50k. You can deliver something using tools like this that are free by thinking creatively about the skills and expertise that you've already got in-house.
Great, thank you, Fiona. Sorry, thank you, Nicola. It's interesting to think about the total cost of any big development project and the percentage of that could be spent on youth engagement. My instinct is that for any major development, the amount that you need to spend on youth engagement would actually be a tiny, tiny fraction. Do you think that's true to say?
I think that's fair to say, and it's also, I kind of touched on it when I was talking about the conversations we've gone through with Mara and the wider group, is youth engagement doesn't need to be over here as this kind of enigma that you do in a box. It's part of an existing conversation, broader community engagement, stakeholder conversations. It all kind of dovetails into one, and so it doesn't necessarily need to be wrapped up in a bow and given a dedicated cost. I'd encourage people to think about how it's embedded into those wider conversations and costed as such.
Great, thank you. We're getting quite a few questions about how transferable voice opportunity power is to other situations. So, for instance, local authority projects, placemaking projects in general, could it be used to talk about a place if there wasn't a particular development happening? And I wonder if any of you have reflections on that, having experienced it.
I'm happy to start. So we have applied the principles of voice opportunity power to several additional youth engagement programs since we did the youth forum. And I think what I'd encourage people to do is look at the kind of broad brush guidance within it, rather than needing to maybe run session 1 to 6 as it's set out, and think more about how you're involving young people early on, how you're giving them meaningful voice, and how you're making sure that they have a seat at the table alongside others. So one example that we've done fairly recently was every few years we run a wellbeing research programme to see what's impacting community wellbeing in the places that we're active. And that includes a number of surveys and workshops that we run with local community representatives. We weren't hearing from enough young people. And so in 2024, we recruited 4 youth researchers to be trained up to survey people on the street and then run and facilitate workshops with other young adults, so we could really get under the skin of what was driving wellbeing for young people. And now we didn't follow session 1 to 5 of VOP, but that is absolutely a project that evidences the principles of voice opportunity power. It wasn't relating to a change of a place. It wasn't relating to a development. It was about day-to-day place management and the role that Grosvenor and other parties within the West End have to ensure that those places feel safe and welcoming for everyone. So we've got a case study of that on the website that I can maybe drop in the chat to see more about how we applied it there.
Thank you, Nicola. And that's a really good reminder that on the Voice Opportunity Power website, there are lots of case studies. So I think some of the questions that are coming up could be answered partially by those case studies. So do take a look at them. I don't know whether Matt or Fiona have any thoughts about how something like Voice Opportunity Power could be applied to projects that are perhaps run by councils. I guess that quite a lot of your work is directly with councils. Do you have any thoughts about this?
Yeah, I do, and at really different scales as well. So we've got, I mean, I will talk anonymously about those councils if that's okay, but on big scale, in the sort of garden community sort of scale, we're working with, although our commission client in that particular project is a development partner with that local authority. I think, as Nicola said, while you might not use the exact session plans, that rhythm of the 2 to 3 degree process, which is about the understanding lived experience, showing the neighbourhood, telling us what you're doing, and the meanwhile project, those principles, those that rhythm of that thinking when working with young people can be applied very well, I think, to new places that don't exist. So and particularly if you have an opportunity to build a longer term relationship with a group of young people, a bit like we did in Grosvenor, or 2-3 degrees and Nicola did in Grosvenor. So you can continue that conversation. I think there's huge value in that process being expanded to thinking about new places that don't exist. But it definitely needs a longer format conversation and an opportunity to build on that. But on a micro scale, certainly we've used that with local authorities, particularly I think of a number of projects in London where we're based, although we work all over the UK, working with local authorities to apply those processes to thinking about play on the way in public realm design that we've done with young people. And particularly some work recently in the centre of London in meanwhile space associated with transport infrastructure, and again working with both local authorities and development partners in those cases. So that's worked certainly really well for us. And yeah, I think anyone who I think the really good thing about the VOC process or the guidance is that for those maybe who are less comfortable with that, it gives a really good flow through to that. But I think Nicola's completely right. It can be adapted and applied, and I think it identifies that it's there to be a starting point for people to build from and adapt.
Thank you, Matt. There are a few more questions coming up. Yes, a recording of today's session will be available. It'll be on the TCPA's website, and we will send a link to everybody who registered to attend today's event. Fiona.
I was just going to add, in terms of that time frame, we recently created a timeline showing when youth engagement can happen, and in fact we plotted all the projects we've been involved in over the past 5 years, and we found that they happen across REBA stages, even pre-REBA stages and post-REBA stages. It's something we'll be putting on our website soon. I think at the moment it's just on LinkedIn, but that might give some thoughts for some people, and a lot of that engagement can be around policy and local area plans. It doesn't necessarily need to be at the stage of actually having a specific place or design team involved, if that makes sense.
Thank you. We're getting some questions about intergenerational things, whether voice opportunity power has been used as intergenerationally, but also perhaps one for Nicola. Did the things that the young people wanted and suggested differ or clash with the things that older people might have wanted or suggested?
Yeah, great questions. Broadly, there was a lot of synergy between the priorities and principles that came out from the youth perspective compared to wider community, including those that might be older. There's no one community, and not everyone sees things the same. Even if you're the same age as someone, you're going to have a different perspective. And so that's where ensuring that those conversations were being had in the round was really, really beneficial. So when Mara and the other Youth Forum members came out and helped present the draft designs to people, that's when those kind of tensions could be hashed out between individuals. They could each explain their opinion, and it was, speaking candidly, much more straightforward that way, to let them kind of work out between themselves rather than us having to step in and kind of mediate. And we found that on other projects as well. We also involved some of the Youth Forum on some public art proposals for South Molton, which is a big mixed retail office scheme just not far from Grosvenor Square, actually. And in the room at the workshop, there was opposing views about the colours we should use, or whether we should allow skateboarders, and all quite kind of live conversations. And it got resolved there and then. The residents could understand why young people wanted that, but ultimately the young people that maybe didn't live on that street could understand why someone every day didn't want there to be a skate park outside their home. And I think maybe having a little bit of faith that people can just work through some of these tensions between them was a really big learning curve for me, and making sure that those conversations are happening in the round rather than keeping different people separate.
That's really interesting and helpful, and I think it's something to reflect on, as so much community engagement now seems to be going online. And it's very easy for us all to sit in our rooms and ping off our own views, but so much more productive if we can be in the same place and listen to other people and come to a consensus rather than just a lot of different individual views. So I think there's a lot of food for thought in that. So we're getting a few more questions. There was one which again I think is for you, Nicola, and it's about the number of respondents. I think so. It says you had 7,000 respondents. Were they just from young people, or could you give a breakdown of age and range and gender, if possible? If that's something you can answer off the top of your head, that would be great. If not,
I can answer it. I won't be able to give you the answer that you want.
Yeah.
So the 7,000 people, that includes everybody that fed back on the designs during the consultation over several years. I don't have the breakdown to hand, but it's a whole mix of people, whether that's residents, community stakeholders, people that are visiting Grosvenor Square, people that are maybe visiting London. It includes the youth forum within that. And there's a real mix of age ranges and genders within it. I think what I would say about kind of representation more broadly as a principle, one element that we found really useful is being able to track the demographics of people that are taking part in your consultations or in your research, like the wellbeing programme that I mentioned, because that then means that you can look back on and fact check yourself with the data. If you can see from your demographic response rate that your people taking part in the consultation doesn't really match, let's say, the ONS makeup of Westminster, you can see then which areas you need to maybe dial up the effort to make sure that you're hearing from a representative group. And that is one of the key drivers behind starting the youth forum in the first place. We knew that we weren't hearing from enough young people, so we did something about it.
Brilliant, that's really helpful. I wonder whether we could have the slide up again with the Voice Opportunity Power website on it, if that's all right. Nicola, I'd like to just ask you about the youth forum. So it started some time ago. Some of the young people, like Mara, are now young adults and doing other things. Has the youth forum continued to recruit young people, younger young people perhaps? And will it continue, or will it stop once the redesign of Grosvenor Square has been built and is in place?
Yeah, good question. We stopped meeting formally several years ago, partly because people, exactly like you say, dispersed and went off to do their own thing. But that's not to say that we didn't keep up those relationships. And like coming together for the panel discussions, the youth forum also took part in that other project consultation I mentioned. And they actually even came and worked at a community event that we held for several years, helping to sell raffle tickets. So they kind of became embedded into lots of different activities that Grosvenor were involved in, without needing to be a set group that was kind of meeting formulaically. And that's really worked for us. It's meant that we've been able to kind of call on them when we need them. But it's also meant that they're involved in something meaningful rather than there for the sake of it. And it meant that we didn't kind of just need to keep meeting up when there wasn't anything to talk to them about. They've still been able to be involved at relevant points, and we've got something that they'll have a view on. What we've also found really useful is the youth forum and the conversations with people like 2 to 3 Degrees really shone a light on other youth networks that already exist close to us. For example, the Westminster Youth Council and other local youth groups that kind of provide that ready-made mix of local young people who are already meeting up once a week that we can then engage with at relevant points. And that's definitely something that particularly those that might feel that they're less, they've got less resources, lean on those sorts of networks, because there will be a local youth club, there may well be a local youth council who you've got a group of young adults there who are ready and right to be engaged with.
Thank you. We're coming to the end of the webinar, and if Marwa's still there, I'd like to put a final question to her. Hello, Marwa, thank you. I'm really interested in what your experience has been like in terms of, if you go to Grosvenor Square now, what do you think about it? How do you feel about it?
It's quite a nostalgic feeling, I think. It's like something we did put a lot of work into, and so I think they did. MATT+FIONA mentioned earlier how they had the seating designs that we'd made like for a little while. That was really, really cool, because it was like all this work that we'd done in theory to be put into practice was very, very meaningful. And I think it really did show that we had like quite a real impact. But even now, I think it's really exciting now that the redesign's officially started. So I think we're very much sort of looking forward to seeing what it looks like after a lot of work and things. And I think we'd seen quite a few of like sort of generated images and stuff of what they expect it to look like. So it'll be quite cool, I think. So it's definitely quite a fond feeling, I'd say. It's like an old friend also almost. So definitely good vibes.
Thank you. I think that's a fantastic place to end the webinar. It's been so inspiring. Thank you all. It really interesting to hear those different perspectives. And I think there's a lot that everybody could learn from the experience that you've outlined. So much food for thought. So I'd like to thank all of you for your excellent presentations. Please do have a look at the Voice Opportunity Power website. There's lots of information there, lots of case studies. We're really interested in what people think about Voice Opportunity Power. If you have a go at using it, do let us know, because we want to make sure it works and perhaps could develop further in future. It's a fantastic tool, and we're really pleased that there's so much interest in it. So thank you to all of our speakers. Thank you for joining us today, and do keep in touch.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.